Dr. Pedro Domingos, welcome to the 90th episode of NEOHUMAN podcast, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I've heard your name for the first time because of your book, obviously, The Master Algorithm: How the Quest for the Ultimate Learning Machine Will Remake Our World. But then, on the bookshelf of China's President for Life, President Xi, was two artificial intelligence-related books, and yours was one of them. How did that feel, hearing something like that? Because I would imagine that it was not coordinated with you.
No, it wasn't coordinated, so I wasn't expecting it. And it felt, well, mixed feelings. On the one hand, it's good that China, at the highest levels of its leadership, understands that AI is important and that they want everybody else in the country to pay attention to it. And I think a lot of good things will come of it, a lot of applications in many different areas. At the same time, seeing a totalitarian regime get excited about AI and my book helping with that is not a very reassuring feeling.
Yeah, it must have been quite a unique experience. What was the thesis of the book, if you don't mind describing it a little, and why did you write it when you did?
Yeah, so the book is an introduction to machine learning for a general audience. And the reason I wrote it is that I believe we've come to a point where it's not enough for machine learning to be known by just the experts. Everybody needs to understand machine learning at some level because it really affects everybody's life in many ways, some of them very important. From presidents and CEOs on down to everybody in their professional private lives, you need to understand what machine learning does and what it doesn't do so you can, number one, make the best use of it, for example, professionally and even personally, so that you know how to interact with the systems that are using machine learning all the time, like Google and Twitter and Facebook and so on. And also so that, in a democracy, there are a lot of important decisions to be made about how machine learning gets used and doesn't, and they're supposed to be made by everybody. And what I saw that was frustrating me was that, at the time I wrote the book, and even more so now, is that there was an enormous amount of discourse about machine learning that was really, really uninformed by the realities of machine learning.
This was when,
Both
2015?
Well, so I started writing the book in 2012.
Okay.
The timing was actually perfect because, by the time the book came out in 2015, the interest in machine learning had gone up, and AI had just gone up to a different level. I first thought of writing a popular science book about machine learning when I was a grad student in the 90s, because already then machine learning was taking off and you're seeing some press stories about it. It's like this thing about exponential growth is that you think something didn't exist until it bursts onto your view, but then you see that then it reaches the next level of people. But at the time, I didn't feel an enormous urgency about it, and also I didn't have a good idea of how to write a book about machine learning. Because writing a book for a general audience is not like writing a textbook. Right? When you're writing a textbook, you can say here's a chapter about neural networks, here's a chapter about Bayesian networks, but that's too boring, right? Nobody's going to read that.
Right, not anymore.
Well, yeah, maybe, good point. But nevertheless, it's helpful to have a story, right? To have a theme. And so, I studied, how to write these kinds of books. And there's a certain number of schemas that you can use. One of them, popular in science books, is the mystery that you want to solve, or the quest. And immediately I realized that the right, story for this book is the quest for the master algorithm. Because that's what really, and that's where the title of the book comes from. The thing that is really remarkable about machine learning and different from everything we've seen before and central to what it does is that one algorithm can learn to do an infinite number of different things, right? Turing machines can do anything, and that's the power of computers, as Turing first explained. But if you want a computer to play chess, you have to program it to play chess. If you want the computer to fly an airplane or be a search engine, you have to program it to do that. The thing that's amazing about machine learning is that you don't need to do that. Just one learning algorithm, if you feed it the right data, will learn to be all these different things. Case in point, look at the backprop, right? Backprop is used to do, everything. Right? So the idea of a master algorithm is like the idea of a master key, right? It's one key that opens all the locks. But of course, this is an ideal. We're not there yet. There's many, different ways to do it. And that's a lot of what the book is, different paradigms in machine learning and how we might unify them all at the end of the day. And also what the applications in the world of machine learning are today. And also, the last chapter in the book, which in some ways for a lot of people is the most interesting one, is a look at the future and where things are headed as we use more machine learning. And honestly, a lot of the stuff that I wrote about, back in 2015, not only has it come true, it has exceeded, my predictions.
The
And the
dystopian
rest
side.
will see.
The dystopian side of things?
Not just, it's funny that you would put it that way. I think this is true of every technology, and a lot of things that are true of every technology are particularly true of AI, because AI, really fires people's imagination for better and for worse. And usually in the first wave of a technology, people are dazzled by the potential. And this, I think, is where things were in 2015. But one of the things that I predicted then is that, well, there's all these concerns like privacy and whatnot, and sooner or later this is going to blow up, right? And it has blown up, in the biggest possible way. And then what happens when the concerns come to the fore is then they take center stage and everybody's, paranoid and focused on the dangers and the dystopian scenarios, which is where we are now, right? Everybody's just completely going, off the rails with the dangers of AI in a way that I think is, also unbalanced. And then finally there comes the point where people just settle down to making things work, and then they do make things better. Maybe not quite as the utopia envisaged, but also preventing the dystopias. And I have no doubt that the same thing will happen with AI if we work on making it happen, right? The future of AI is not utopian or dystopian in some predetermined way. It's what we make of it. It will be good because we make it good, which again gets back to the motivation for writing the book, is that we need input from everybody on what to do with this.
Yeah,
also, there's another. Yeah, it's exactly, precisely. AI is the tool. Exactly right. AI is a tool, and a lot of people talk about the power that AI gives, X, Y, or Z. And what I think people need to bear in mind is AI is a tool for those who know how to use it. If you don't know how to drive a car, it won't take you where you want to go, right? You don't need to understand how the engine works. That's for the engineers. But you need to understand where the steering wheel and the pedals are. And the idea of the book is to tell people not necessarily about the engine, but about the steering wheel and the pedals. So that it can be a tool for you, so that it makes you powerful. We don't want AI to make totalitarian governments powerful, or companies that are already overmighty even more overmighty. We want AI to be a tool that empowers every single one of us. That's the goal, and that's very much why I wrote the book.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that the dystopian side of things are becoming more and more maybe attractive would be an interesting term to use it for a lot of people is that they're experiencing it firsthand, especially if you're coming from a certain way of thinking about politics and life and philosophy and all that. You just see that you're being shut down, you're being silenced, you're being deplatformed. And what you hear is that a lot of people who are running these companies, they are blaming algorithms. They're like, well, it's not our fault. It's the algorithm's fault that prioritize, for example, liberal headlines against conservative headlines. Just an example. So for a lot of people, this seems like a existential threat to the way of their life and the way of their thinking, and they kind of connect this to algorithms and AI, which to me is kind of ruining the potential for all the good stuff that can happen in the coming years and decades. I do believe that we depend on it because we've evolved with our technology to get where we are. We haven't done it separately.
You're right that people are now experiencing it firsthand. But what happens is actually that, again, AI is like a blank canvas onto which people project whatever preoccupations they have, particularly political ones, right? And for example, liberals are very concerned with fairness, and they tend to see in AI algorithms just a cesspool of bias that that isn't really there, but they think needs to be dealt with. On the other hand, if you're more of a libertarian persuasion, what you see in AI is Big Brother. It's this thing that's going to oppress you. And the thing to realize is that none of these concerns are unfounded on any side of the spectrum. But in many cases, they've been, people perceive the threat to be not just bigger than it really is, but different. And again, if you understand what's really going on, actually, you can then address the problems properly as opposed to all the, many very confused things that are flying around. Case in point, when you say that the companies say, oh, don't blame us, blame the algorithms, right? This is actually both true and false. It's true in the sense that, yes, the algorithms are making these decisions. And, for example, when a lot of conservatives say, oh, Google, Twitter, etc., they're discriminating against us, I was actually very skeptical of that for a long time in the past, for the reason that, obviously the workforces at these companies are overwhelmingly liberal, so that is certainly a cause for worry. But I have never seen evidence of people deliberately plugging their liberal politics into the algorithms. So I don't think that, a lot of the times people interpret an algorithm as having done X, Y, or Z, when in fact it was just optimizing its objective function. In more recent times, as the decisions have started to be made by people and by the CEOs and the pressure from their workforces, now I really think there's something to worry about, right? But again, the problem there is not the algorithms, actually it's the people making the decisions. But to get back to the algorithms, right? It's very easy to blame the algorithms. But the algorithms were designed by people, in particular machine learning algorithms. And again, the problem is not so much that they were designed by, say, liberals with, a liberal takeover in mind, assigning conservative voices. The problem is that the algorithms were designed to maximize engagement, right? Which, maximizing engagement these days has a really bad name.
That's an incentive, basically.
Yeah, but again, this is how machine learning and AI and many other algorithms work. Is like there's an objective function and you're trying to optimize it. And really where the social discussion and the personal intervention needs to happen is at the level of what is or what should be that objective function. How it gets optimized is really like a technical problem. It's like, how do you make the engine run faster? Well, let the engineers worry about that. And then you decide what speed you want to drive it at, right? And the thing is that maximizing engagement as an objective function is actually a perfectly natural thing to do. The problem is the side effects.
Right, the consequences.
Exactly.
Right.
So the algorithms are to blame, yes, but the engineers are to blame not for their evil intent, but for just having set the algorithms to maximize this thing without realizing all the consequences that would have. Which, in fairness, in the early days, it was easy to miss that. Right? Again, I don't think people were being evil or really stupid about it. They were just oblivious, and we can't afford to be oblivious at this point.
The objective that you're talking about is exactly the problem that we have with alignment problem, right? Big picture wise, because the objective can be narrow, that I'm hungry. The objective is to get to the kitchen. I go down the stairs, get plate, blah, blah, blah. But then there are bigger objectives that this is where we get to AI ethics, which for years I've asked people without even knowing that there is such a role exists as AI ethicists. That to me, that's terrifying. But hopefully we can talk about it. But for years I asked people on this podcast, technologists, philosophers, developers, whether or not ethics and morality is objective or subjective. And every single time I heard the answer, it is subjective. Unless we are creating a closed context, which to me is a disservice if you're going to explore the unknown and there are a bunch of people sitting up there in charge, I would assume they think of to be the master algorithm. And are like, we're going to parent you. We're going to teach you what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. I don't care who you are, what gender you are, what color you are, what race you are. You are not in the position, especially in the United States of America, to define these kind of values. That's why we say, in God we trust.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, if somebody tells you that ethics is objective, what you should do is run away as fast as you can.
I'm from Iran, man. I'm coming from Iran. I was a refugee in Canada. I'm an immigrant here. I had to be human trafficked out of Iran. And the major problem there is that some dude is sitting up there and is like, I'm telling you the orders of God. And this is how you have to live your lives, basically. And they have monopoly on violence, both of which they try to do right here in the United States. And I think most Americans think that what happened in Iran cannot happen in America. It totally can happen.
Yes. In fact, that I think is the big worry, is that anybody who's lived in a totalitarian regime of any stripe whether it's Iran or the Soviet Union or China, et cetera, they recognize what's happening.
Yep.
I grew up in Portugal, which was a fascist country when I was born. The secret police had a file on my dad because he was a professor and he was pretty outspoken. And then there was a revolution. And for a couple of years there, Portugal was on its way to becoming a communist country because the communists were taking power. And I recognize everything that I see happening in America today. There's some new variations, but the essence, and again, it's not surprising to me that a lot of people who have come from countries or have close relatives who lived through these things, they're the ones who are most alarmed. The problem is that the Americans don't actually have the pattern recognition. Most Americans don't have the pattern recognition for what is going on here. But there is a set of people who are trying to impose their ethics on everybody else. And of course, one of the things that's new about today is that there are these technologies that while they can be great tools for democracy, they can also be great tools for totalitarianism. In fact, in some ways, a big AI is bigger than Big Brother, right? It's something that not even Big Brother could have dreamed of. And that's what's really alarming, right? I hear a lot of people worrying about like, oh, these companies, they're manipulating you. And, I can't get excited about that because all they can do is try to sell me products and I refuse to buy them. That doesn't keep me up at night. But AI in the hands of the state, they can do a lot more than sell me products. So that I think is something we seriously need to worry about.
So what are your thoughts about AI ethicists, especially in a certain company that I'm trying not to name, but I know that you took a public stance with respect to address this issue that, basically, I think Naval Ravikant, he tweeted a couple of days ago that scientists who are opposed to change, something to this nature, they're not scientists, they're priests. And I see this kind of approach to make an ethical AI while your ethic itself is coming from a place that is, to me, completely distorted, is not based on reality, is completely ideological. What is the dynamic? And please describe that because I'm sure most people, they don't even know such a thing exists, but I believe it's such an important part of this whole thing when you're determining values of this machine that can basically take control of every aspect of our lives.
Yeah. So AI ethics actually exists and has existed for many decades. Most people, including many, I think, current so-called AI ethicists, don't realize that people have been debating the ethics of AI from day one, right? From the 1950s on, right? There are people who've made their multi-decade careers, thinking about the ethics of AI and the alignment problem and things like this. So this is actually not a new field. It used to be a tiny field, also because AI itself was small. But what's happening in AI ethics is actually very different from that. Very, very different. What's happening? So first of all, ethics is a very benign word, right? Who could disagree with ethics? And of course, AI raises ethical issues. But what we're seeing in AI today is actually people of a particular political orientation seeking to impose their politics on AI, and as a result on society.
And they're using ethics as an instrument.
Yeah, oh, exactly. And I think they're completely, or some of them at least, are completely open about this. It's a tool.
Yeah.
This is a tool that they're going to use to achieve their ends. And then, it's easy to dupe people into like, oh, but there's these ethical concerns and they're addressing them. What could be bad about that, right? You have to actually look at like what is being discussed and what is being proposed, right? And in particular, what is being proposed under AI ethics is, if, for example, probably the biggest example is under the guise of AI fairness, people are actually proposing and implementing algorithms that force equal outcomes.
Equity.
By race, by gender, what is called equity. Is that like, if I have X% of women at the input, I have to have X% at the output. And now, you may disagree or agree with this, right? Reasonable people agree, reasonable people disagree. I very much disagree, but I respect the people who agree. But the bottom line is this is politics.
Yeah.
This is not ethics. This is a political question to be discussed as a political question. But what we're having right now is it's being swept under the rug as if it's ethics. And then everybody, and this is kind of like where I came into this, is like, there's an attempt to impose this at conferences and so on, right? For example, if you now these days at NeurIPS, if you have a paper that they think promotes unfairness, right? By their definition, the paper can get rejected because it's subject to this ethical, political review, right? And again, the people organizing this are not actually shy about saying what they want to accomplish, right? So this is, and we have to fight back against that, because what's going to happen if we don't is, and this is in fact what is happening, and you know what I'm trying to combat is, then the society at large, what they hear is, oh, the AI community says that this is the right thing. This is this consensus of the community, and it's what science says. Science says is a very powerful pair of words,
Right.
right? And what you do, right, and these people are, you know, some of them at least quite practice this, is like, if you have an agenda, you go to the relevant scientific community, you silence all the people who disagree with the agenda, and then you say, science says that,
Yeah.
well, you know, science says do what we want to do. Yeah, exactly. The science is settled. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. AI is just like, so if you've been observing these things for a while, in many ways, what is happening in AI is not a surprise. In fact, I started looking at this happening, you know, again, you know, several years ago. And unfortunately, you know, the details vary. Some of them can still shock you, but the way things have been going is unfortunately not surprising at all. And, you know, people need to be alerted. And I'm trying to alert people to this, and also to combat this in the context of the AI community. The problem, of course, is that this politics also comes with cancel culture, where there's a lot of people who are against this. There's many who don't understand and are oblivious, but there's a lot of people who are against, but they're just afraid to speak up because they're afraid of the consequences. Again, just as in a totalitarian regime. Right? People, you know, they know about the Gulag and the KGB, right? What they don't know is that most of the enforcement in the Soviet Union was just the last resort. It was done by exactly the kinds of things that we see today. It's like the peer pressure, the loss of employment, the retaliations, etc., etc. The term political correctness was invented in the Soviet Union, right? Precisely to describe this type of thing, you know, in some ways, regardless of what the exact content is. The content of political correctness in the US might be different than it was in the Soviet Union, because the ideologies are somewhat different, but the modus operandi is actually exactly the same.
Yeah. The post that was shared by the actor from Mandalorian, that Disney fired her, and basically, and she was sharing someone else's post. I thought it was spot on, and what a brave woman, because she basically gave up her career until after the revolution to see what will happen. And she was basically saying that the history is edited so you don't see the bridge that leads from, you know, peace and calm and everybody getting along until, you know, people getting burned in concentration camps. And she was saying that people who started beating up the Jews in the beginning, they were not Nazis, they were their neighbors, and including children. And it's completely believable to me, because I witnessed people who have turned 180 degree under the theocratic regime overnight. You know, she was like completely open about her sexuality and all of that. The next day she can't wait to go and, you know, see this shrine because of some social point, you know, because if she wants to get bread, she'll be like in the front of a line.
Yeah, again, people who've never seen this, or at least don't know some history, have a hard time picturing how this happens. But which is why I think just, you know, raising awareness is very important. So, for example, people don't realize that, you know, if you look, for example, at the show trials, you know, Stalin's show trials or the Cultural Revolution, every generation of people who condemned one set of people to the gulags or whatever, they were the next ones in line.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, but this will never happen to me. Or if I pay my obeisances, then I will be safe. Actually, what you're doing when you do that is you're accelerating the process. And it will get to you, right? Like, nobody's safe. Not on any level, not in any field. And again, this is not abstraction. You already see today, like, children turning in their parents for their violations of political correctness, which, again, if you know some history, it's really chilling. And if somebody had told me, like, 20 years ago, this is what America, the beacon of, freedom is going to look like in 2020, I would be like, come up with a better plot. That's not a realistic movie, right? In fact, the thing about this movie is that we've already seen it many times, just not in English.
Yeah, that's such a good way to put it. And chilling. Because
Yes.
yeah, I mean, it's natural end that it will destroy everything until it destroys itself. It's a virus. It's cancer, and it spreads on the goodwill of people and cowardice of people.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. In fact, I think between virus and cancer, I think it's more like a cancer,
Mm.
which means it's worse because a virus is a very simple agent, and it comes from the outside and it does its thing, right? Cancer is when the cells in your own body go awry,
Mm.
right? And unfortunately cancer is not just an uncontrolled growth; it's actually organized enough to survive and and propagate around it until it kills its host organism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the thing, is that at the end of the day, cancer does kill the host organism. And this is why the Cultural Revolution in the end stopped, because it was destroying China, literally, with famine, et cetera, right? At some point, things become so bad, or in Cambodia, or during Stalinism, during like the 20s and 30s, right? At some point, like people recognize, right? But by then, millions have died,
Yeah.
right? And in the beginning, nobody says like, oh, this is, if somebody, in the beginning of all this says like, oh, millions are going to die, they'll be like, oh my God, like what are you talking about? But that's what happens. And again, just like with cancer, early detection and prevention is the key. The sooner you cut out the tumor, the less damage it'll do. At some point, it becomes impossible to cut it out, and it does kill the host organism. So I think cancer is actually a very good analogy for this.
Yeah. Excellent. So socially, the way that you're suggesting to fight back is basically to raise awareness and to speak out. If you really feel like there is something wrong in your gut feeling, just act on it rather than rationalize it for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, so I think speaking out is extremely important. I think more people need to speak out. I think it's not enough. And in particular, I think a lot of the response to cancel culture so far has kind of emphasized personal courage, which I think is very important. But personal courage is not enough. You need to get organized. You cannot fight an organized movement that's very widespread in education and in the media, in parts of politics, et cetera, with a disorganized set of people. So I think getting organized is essential. So I think people need to push back. Again, all these individual initiatives and small scale initiatives are extremely important, but they're not enough. You need a higher level of organization to combat the level of organization that's there on the other side.
Is there any movement within academia? Because what I learned from James Lindsay and Peter is that this whole thing started in academia in the late 60s. And it needs to end and stop at academia because that's basically the spiritual fountain that feeds this whole thing. Is there any kind of a movement for all of you guys who are getting canceled or pressured under political correctness to leave the institutions and create an alternative to institutions to make the institutions obsolete?
So you're right. This started in the universities, and that's the number one place where we have to stop it. Because again, the universities have a very high viral coefficient. That's the thing, is that, there's this famous quote by Lincoln that says, whatever is taught in the classroom today will be the politics of the government tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And this is exactly what's been happening. In particular, radicals took control of the ed schools at universities in the 70s, the education schools, and they have never let go. And, the educational school is one of the most obscure and ignored parts of a university, but it's actually the most important one because it trains the teachers. And then the teachers go to the high schools and they train everybody. And this is actually the most perverse thing about this, is that everybody talks about like, oh, students get politicized at the universities. Actually, they don't. They get politicized when they're 6 years old.
Wow.
And 10. I mean, I have a kid. I've seen him go through this. And in a moderate part of, and it's like they're defenseless. Students have an amazing tendency to believe what their teachers tell them. And the education schools have been turned into full-blown indoctrination machines. The one at UW, my university, is a good example. They just what they do is they spend the whole year, teaching you quite explicitly activist politics. They don't teach you how to teach. That's secondary. They teach you how to be a social justice warrior. And then these people go out into the schools and they indoctrinate the children. And then 10, 20 years later, these children are everywhere. They're in the media, they're in companies, and that's what explains what is going on. These ideas have not spread because they make any sense or because they're good for the country or for society. They have spread because the teachers are spreading them. It's not a mystery, right? And so you got to stop it there.
Teachers
right?
have become priests.
No, exactly, right? And now you're asking, like, is there a movement to do something about this? There's not one unified movement that I've seen. There's many different movements. There's also a lot of discussion about what to do, right? And a lot of people, put their hope in fighting this from within, right? My opinion is actually exactly the same as yours. And I say this with great sadness because I'm a professor, right? I spent 20 years as a professor in an American university. I think the rot goes too deep. And these things are too entrenched. The paradox about universities is that they're institutions that promote change at the same time that the most resistance to change anywhere.
Yeah.
It's harder to change a university than almost anything, right? And once this ideology has gotten entrenched, and it has, from the administrators to the students, it's almost impossible. I mean, like, the problem that I see is that people increasingly in the universities, they live in this parallel universe. Because again, universities to some extent are detached from the real world because they're not concerned with day-to-day things. They're looking at the future. And on a good day, that's actually a great thing, right? On the other hand, it also creates this possibility for the universities to kind of like escape into this parallel universe, which would be bad enough. But then they start teaching our children to live in this parallel universe. But the problem is that, like, I'm pessimistic about changing universities from within, right? I understand, and I think people, should try that as well. But I think it has to come from outside, in one of two ways, right? One is, as much as I believe very, very strongly in academic freedom, a lot of the universities are state universities, and just because you're allowed to do whatever research you want doesn't mean you're allowed to teach whatever cockamamie ideas you want to the next generation of society, right? So society does have to put some boundaries on what you're allowed to teach people, right? Otherwise, they get taught these things and you see the results, right? Like, freedom needs to defend itself, right? So we can't allow freedom to the people who would destroy it, right? That's the essential paradox, Popper's paradox and so on. So I think there's a lot that can be done there in the legislative sphere, right? I mean, maybe not in blue states, but at least in red states, right? It's like, and I understand people are furious, conservatives are furious because it's like, they're indoctrinating my children and they're doing it with my tax money.
Yeah.
Well, it's your tax dollars, right? It's your representatives, so you can't do something about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has to be thought out very carefully, but I think that's one area of intervention. The other area, which ultimately I think is the most important one, is this is still a free country and you can start new institutions. And what we can do is start new universities that will destroy the old ones because they're better.
Yep.
Because parents still care about their children getting a good education, and the employers still care about having well-prepared employees, right? So we can, and unfortunately, right, or maybe ironically, universities that they stand to, they're actually very fragile for a number of other reasons. They're ultra expensive. The students often take second row to other concerns, et cetera, like they're not very tech savvy, right? The whole university system is just ripe for disruption. So I think above all, we need a new set of universities that will just make these ones irrelevant. It's a generation-long project, right? This is not something that's going to happen overnight, but I think that's what we really need to work on. And that's what I think, our future depends on.
So a very good example is what happened to Jordan Peterson a couple of years ago, that the government of Canada, they cut his budget, his research budget, just, out of nowhere. And then they crowdfund for his research. And they made like 40 times, 50 times more than the money that he would have gotten from the government, which once again proved the strength of this decentralized network, which is the same thing that happened with GameStop stock again, right? So it seems like people are waking up to the ways that they can organize against this centralized tyranny. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who, as you said, their interest is invested within these rotten institutions. So they will do whatever they can with regulations. And you know what a nightmare it will be when corporations and government, they become one in order to maintain that power against the everyday, you know, kind of citizen and individuals, which individual rights is the whole purpose of United States.
Yeah, I mean, but again, you have to remember that no society is immune to the problem of collective action, right? And the problem of collective action is that the right thing does not necessarily prevail because you need to get organized to make it prevail, and organizing has a cost. In a way, the beauty of information technology and the internet and so on is that it actually lowers the cost of organizing, right? Which raises the potential to do things which might be good or bad. But for example, you can do good things like crowdfund something that otherwise might not get funded. But of course, the other side of this coin of collective action is that there is a very large number of people who are completely invested in the status quo. There's a whole bureaucracy at universities, and it keeps ever increasing, and that's part of what makes it expensive, right? There's people who would lose their jobs if you said like, oh no, we don't need all these things anymore, right? So they will fight tooth and nail to combat this. Some of them out of ideology, some of just, you know, out of their self-interest, or some combination of the two. So of course you can expect a lot of pushback, right? But the thing is, where is the, you know, what is the choke point? The choke point is that universities need to get funded. That's, you know, that's the thing, right? So the way you hit that choke point is either the states that own the universities, right, say, well, actually, no, here's what I'm going to do, right? That will make you more accountable. And, you know, we can talk a little bit about that. That's one part. The other part is you get competing universities, right? They actually give a better education for less money.
Yeah.
And all the people subsidizing all this, you know, bad stuff, you know, that just the money gets, you know, goes away. And so this stuff dies out because it just doesn't have, you know, the funding sources anymore.
Yeah, constitutional sanctuary states that will uphold constitutional values of United States, which is a great document, I think, especially for this time, especially when the other end of the spectrum is centralized Chinese Communist Party, which it has is, you know, its own advantages. But at the same time, you know, we see that what will happen if you allow small, relatively speaking, group of people to be in charge of everything. Maybe ICOing a university, you know, just raise millions and millions of dollars in Bitcoin or Ethereum or something, and then dedicate that kind of money to researches that are getting rejected for PC reasons.
I mean, actually think fundamentally there is actually not a lack of money to do something like this, right? Again, it's a question of organization,
right? Political will. In a sense.
Yeah, and you know, people need to, you know, I mean, for example, right? How did a lot of universities that existed they start? They started with an endowment because if somebody said like, I want to endow a university. I think there's a lot of people with a lot of money who would be, you know, willing to do that if they believed in what, you know, was happening. There's also a lot of people who are willing to fund this with many smaller scale donations, which if it's a lot of people makes a big difference. But most of all, at the end of the day, right, I get back to the students and the parents and the employers, right? And like, you know, people will sacrifice the shirt off their backs to give their children a good education. So if I give their children a better education than University X, and they're you know, sufficiently informed about that, you know, they will come to me as opposed to University X. So I think at the end of the day, that is the biggest part of this. You can use the other things, whether it's philanthropy or large scale, you know, small size donations to get this off the ground. But at the end of the day, I think what we're going to have is, you know, universities that actually, first of all, they're well run, they're not bloated and inefficient. And there's many different ways in which universities are inefficient today. And also, you know, there's this thing that like, you know, I get a degree, you know, getting a, you know, education is a labor intensive industry, right? And that's part of why it's expensive, right? So there's no miracle at that level, but it's worth it. So when I get a degree, I actually owe a big debt, right? Now, whether the debt is owed in money because I took out a student loan or whether the debt is owed to society because I was funded with that money, I owe that debt. And people need to understand that. And once I graduate, I go out into the world and I repay that debt. Again, whether in money, because I pay back my loans, or to society because I do my good. People have to have that conscience that, like, society is going to invest in me, and then I'm going to pay that back, right? And so at the end of the day, right, like, a lot of people get a degree and it costs a lot of money, but they know they're going to make more than that money when they do their jobs, right? And in fact, part of the problem of how universities are structured today is that, for at least originally well-intentioned reasons, there is not a good alignment between what people major in and what they study within the major and how socially useful it is, right? And again, it's not like, for example, well, engineering obviously socially useful and so on, but sociology and psychology and the humanities and the arts, they're all socially useful if you do them properly. The problem is that they've kind of like fallen off this cliff where they, doing things that are increasingly either irrelevant or positively harmful, right? So you need to have that feedback mechanism that says, look, this is not, what people need to be learning, right? And also, like, there's a, like, markets do this very well, right? That's what they do. But, unfortunately, education in that regard does not act like a good market, is matching the needs to the supply, right? And it's like, it's nice to say, like, oh, just major in whatever your heart decides. Well, okay, I'm going to major in something that I won't get a job in, and then I'll be a waiter. And then I'll be very, very bitter about how I was fooled, right? It's like, what you major in should be a combination of, yes, something you love, absolutely, and you think you can be good at, but something that, society has a need for, right? And the part of the paradox of today's economy as technology changes is that there's a shortage of jobs in some areas, and there's a huge shortage of qualified people in others, right? And so, gee, like, let's focus on the areas where we need more people and not the ones where we need less, right? This is not rocket science, but at the universities, saying what I just said is extremely controversial. Right. Because people will say, like, oh, you're debasing the university, you're commercializing it, nothing is more important than the beauty and power of a liberal arts education. And I'm like, I understand all of that. I love the liberal arts, more than most computer scientists. I read a lot of books and so on and so forth. But, like, you're telling people to go major in this and then they can't get a job. Why is that a good idea, right? You have to make these things useful enough that then the jobs will be there, right? And unfortunately, when these majors become useless, the employers sooner or later realize that they are useless, right? And so it's not so much that the humanities are dying, is that they are being killed from inside, right? Is that there's actually a lot of uses for these things, right? Again, even a tech company should not just be run by technologists. Heck no, right? We really need, sociologists and psychologists and people who know communications and, et cetera, right? But they need to have been trained, right? Such, number one, they know what to do. And number two, they know how to interface with the technologists. And that's what we don't have enough of today. So part of what I think a new generation universities will do is, it can start, I think, in the more, it's obvious to start something like that with things like computer science and so on, where the need is dire. But eventually, I think a lot of their role will be to have a better teaching of social science and humanities and arts and education, right? I think one of the most important schools at these universities will be the education school for the reasons that we've been talking about.
Let me ask you, I don't want us to run out of time. What is your sharp exit? What's the latest I can have you?
You mean in terms of time?
Yeah.
Oh, no particular time.
Oh, okay. This described the social measures to be taken against this cancer. Wonderful advice and ideas there. At the same time, let's also talk about the solution for artificial intelligence, which to me is not yet another centrally driven company or corporation. It's a decentralized network. And the only example I can think of at this point is Singularity Net, which Ben Goertzel is behind it. I'm sure you know Ben Goertzel.
Yeah.
So his whole thing is to allow millions or hundreds of millions of AI agents to ultimately give rise to the decentralized AGI. So that superior intelligence wouldn't be controlled by Chinese Communist Party or Google or US government or anyone else.
Yeah, again, one of the things that in the master algorithm, there's a section about what I call a society of models. And again, a lot of that has already happened. It hasn't, of course, it wasn't going to happen in 5 years, but you can already see a lot of it. And the idea of a society of models is that every one of us has a coterie of agents that are artificial, that are AIs, and that have models of you, right? And what they do is they do stuff on your behalf. So what we have is this kind of like cyberspace underground where all of these transactions are happening, right? To take a concrete example, that I use in the book. If I want to find a job, right? What I should be able to do is on LinkedIn, I just press the button, find me a job, right? And then my model goes and talks to the models of all the places that might give me a job, and they interact in possibly very rich ways. The better my model is and the better my model is, right? And then out of those bazillions of possible combinations, the few, the 10 or 20 that look best are the ones where I will actually interview at the place, right? And notice this is both ends. It's not one big AI. It's AIs, right, that are going to negotiate with each other. Mm-hmm. Same thing for buying a car. If I want to buy a car, my AI is going to go out and look for the cars that I want. Same thing for dates, right? Dating is actually one of the most significant, least appreciated applications of AI today because, people get matched by algorithms. There are children alive today that wouldn't have been born if the algorithm hadn't said to their parents, you two guys should go on a date.
That's how I met my girlfriend. We've been together more than 6 years. And it was funny. It was like meant to be, I guess, because our distance on Tinder, both of us was set to 1 mile. We didn't want to go any further. And that was it. And more than 6 years.
There you go, right? So, speak of the devil. But the point is, right? Like the way matching is done today is very primitive. It's like based on your profile, or what people, something like Tinder. You have to swipe, so you have to look at a lot of alternatives, right? The beauty of having AIs is that it magnifies your intelligence, right? And what I envisage, in fact, I even gave an interview to Marie Claire about this and the future of dating, right? You wouldn't think about an AI expert giving an interview to Marie Claire, but they're actually on top of this, and what the different dating sites do and whatnot is I think ultimately the only good way to do this is to have a model of Alice and a model of Bob go on a date in cyberspace. Mm-hmm. Right? And so what happens is that your model goes on 1 million dates, or goes on a dates with 1 million people, 1,000 dates each, right? You do this big Monte Carlo simulation, and then the one, because some dates just go well, even though maybe those people would have been a good match, and some of them, actually go well, and then people think oh, this was meant to be, right? So what you need to do is you just need to simulate a lot of dates between these agents. And then the pairs of people that have the highest fraction of percentage of successful dates, those are the ones who maybe should be suggested to go on a real date. So I very much agree with this idea that what you want to have is not one big Skynet centralized AI, but everybody has their AIs. AI is just an extension of your intelligence. The way to think of AI is not like AI is my adversary that's going to enslave me. Right? Is that AI makes me more powerful? AI is just an exoskeleton for your mind. It's like power steering, except instead of moving some wheels, you're actually doing cognitive stuff.
Yeah, David Chalmers talked about extended mind theory. That even if you write down your shopping list on a piece of paper, that's extension of your mind.
Yeah, exactly. And some people call this the exocortex. It's the part of your brain that resides outside your brain. And of course, a notepad is exocortex. A hard disk is exocortex. And these days, if you think about it, you have pieces of your exocortex all over the place. In data centers in Oregon, and right, it's you don't even know where most of your exocortex is. And this will only pick up speed, right? In fact, what makes us smart is that we have this external intelligence, right? In some ways, we have outsourced a lot of our memory to Google.
Right.
You don't need to remember those things anymore. And there's a lot of confusion. There's like this, this that like, oh, the web makes us stupid. Google makes us stupid because now I don't know, how to, remember ABI anymore. No, the point is like the system of you and Google is actually smarter than just you alone. There's this notion that, Richard Dawkins proposed many years ago, called the extended phenotype. In fact, he has a book called The Extended Phenotype, which is actually one of the most obscure, but actually he says it's his favorite.
I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, I highly recommend it because it's a very insightful book and it has never been more relevant. What is the extended phenotype? His point is that your genes control your body, but not only. The dam is the extended phenotype of the beaver. Right? The spider's web is the extended phenotype of the spider. Right? The genes made that web via the spider. Right? And technology is the extended phenotype of humanity. Right? It's like the phenotype is the body that the genotype creates, right? Like, technology is our extended phenotype. And AI is just another, computers in general, right? They're just another aspect of that extended phenotype. So, our genes, deep in our cells, they create us, and then we create this technology, and together we're more powerful than we would be without it. Just like, the spider needs, can catch, insects with a web that it wouldn't otherwise.
So the way I think of it is very 2001 Space Odyssey, that the monkey finds a bone and it realizes that it can kill to eat. But the next thing that it does is protect its group of monkey against the other group of monkey for the water resource that they had. And they threw up the bone and it turned into the space shuttle and so on and so forth. I think that we grew and evolved together, and how we achieved the technology primarily, I have no idea. Was it given to us? Was it an accident? Was it part of the simulation? I have no idea, but I do know that we have evolved because of each other, which is a context that if you think of it, then war and peace are become two sides of the same coin, that there will be no peace without war. That wars have terrible consequences. At the same time, a lot of the technologies that we are using on a daily basis, we have them because of wars. They were invented because of military adventures. So I just want to read a quote from your book because I think this fit this context perfectly, that our beliefs are based on our experience, which gives us a very incomplete picture of the world. And it's easy to jump to false conclusions. And it seems to me that AI agents, as extension of our minds, when they're left uninterrupted by ethicists and other gatekeepers, we don't even know what the future of human civilization is going to be, because we will have the opportunity for the first time in our history and existence to take on a very practical approach on an individual life journey, which is very spiritual at the same time too. The spiritual route goes within. It has nothing to do with outside. Everything is a projection.
Yeah, if you think about AI in the long, if you take the long view of AI, right, it's really just the continuation of an evolutionary process that encompasses both the culture that we've created, right? Think about a book, right? A book is just a way to communicate across time, right? And make connections that otherwise wouldn't happen. Language itself allows us to make connections that otherwise wouldn't happen. And then books writing, right, takes that to another level.
Language itself can be considered a technology.
No, exactly. That's my point. Yeah. I really don't, I very much agree with this idea that biology and technology are on a continuum.
Right.
And you can understand AI just as the law, like where do these things come from? It's really an evolutionary process. And the evolutionary operators themselves get more sophisticated over time. They're not just random mutations and crossovers. Now our brains are actually making it happen, right? But the same process is still happening. And then when an innovation, appears, it's often first used, on the world, like the bone in 2001. But then, of course, like competition is unavoidable. As is, war is just an extreme form of competition.
And necessary, right? It seems like.
Yeah, exactly. And necessary, absolutely, right? There's no evolution without species going extinct, right? That's the reality. But at the same time, competition is the mother of cooperation.
Yeah.
We cooperate because a cooperating set of units beats a non-cooperating set. Right? So cooperation is good because it actually helps you in competition. Mm-hmm. And competition is good because it creates cooperation. And like your brain is a cooperation of a lot of systems, right? Like one theory of your brain is the so-called society of mind, right? So I think these phenomena actually, they're the same, of cooperation and competition and, and evolutionary operators and so on. They are present at all levels from the cell to the largest, socio-technical systems that we're building today.
And this experience that we are having based on our environment, this will just expand more that we can sense our environment, right? Because let's say that we merge with artificial intelligence through a device like Neuralink, which I'm interested to know your opinion about that too. Then what would be the limit of our experience? Because if that AI system has the ability to sense my partner in Japan and I'm in Florida, what is the limit of my body? What is the limit of myself? And what is the limit of my experience? And what will happen to the values that I would create based on that new new experience and new understanding of that experience, and how the society is going to react to it?
Yeah, I think there are some physical limits to the degree of integration that can be achieved, but we're nowhere near them yet. I think in the meantime, what we'll see, and I'm very much speculating here, is this gets to the topic of consciousness, right? There's some level of information integration at which you start to have something like consciousness, and some people argue that an ant has consciousness. Some argue that it doesn't. But I think if you, instead of seeing this in terms of black and white, you see it in terms of gray levels, right? You could say there's already some level of consciousness that exceeds the individual. Just as maybe in your own brain, there might be levels of consciousness lower than the one that you're aware of. Maybe you're just, one of the, like you're the neocortex, but what about, the cerebellum, right? What about, right? I don't know, right? Yeah. Like what about your immune system, right? What about the part, so maybe certain modules in your brain that control different parts of your body, they have some small level of consciousness, right? In that same way, I think, there is already some level of consciousness that exceeds the individual, probably still, even at this stage, quite impoverished. But obviously, as this progresses, I think that will become a bigger and bigger force. And then we, right, I, with my own brain, I may not be able to fully grasp what is going on because I have my level of consciousness, but I will have an interface with it that works in both directions.
But what would be the definition of the I?
No, so again, well, it can be more than one, right? But, so here's one very simplistic version, right? Maybe the eyes are still our eyes. They don't have to be, right? Because there'll be, there's sensors and cameras and Internet of Things and whatnot. But, the sensors, your eye is a highly integrated sensor.
But I'm talking about the I as a self. You said I experience it in a certain way. What would be the definition of the I?
No, there are different eyes, right? There's still the eye that's you, but there's a larger eye.
But who's the experiencing? Who's experiencing it?
Well, it depends on how, a set of eyes is organized. Actually, let me answer that question by first going down to a lower level, right? You could, think of imagine someone sitting in a neuron, right? And that neuron is the eye. All they see is like, there's some action potentials coming in, and every now and then I decide to fire, right? That's the eye. There's a little eye there, right? It's very impoverished, right? And that neuron has no idea what is going on in your brain, right? But it has an idea of one micro part of it, right? And now, like, a neuron is really an extreme example, right? There's larger parts of your brain. There are again, as I was saying, little brains in their own right in some sense, right? So and like the movie, what's that Pixar movie where the different emotions are represented?
Yeah, I can't remember.
Different characters, right? That's actually a really good metaphor because in some ways the different emotions are different agents in your brain. They're each competing to take over your brain at a given moment, right? Anger, anger is trying to be angry, and of course there's like the neurotransmitters and hormones that underlie all this. But a certain level of abstraction, at any given moment, what is coming into you from your senses and your memories, etc., will make certain emotions take over and others take a back seat. right? You can think of your angry self as one self that is awake some of the time and asleep the rest of the time, or your happy self, or your loving self, etc., etc. So even inside your brain, there's like this set of, you can think of it as a set of competing and collaborating agents.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that same thing will happen. Now, think of a company, right? Think of a startup. There's a dozen people, right? Uh, One of them is the anger guy, right? Because he's more whatever competitive, more Another one is the optimist. Another one, right? There's like people who play different roles in an organization in some way are similar to the roles that different emotions play in your brain, right? And now you can take this to an even larger level, like in an economy, different companies play different roles, and even different countries play different roles in the world, and so on. So I think this again, who's going to be the I? The answer is, this is a hierarchical system. There's I's at all of these levels. Some of them are more cohesive, and so they look more like what you would call an I. Some of them are less, but it's a matter of degrees. It's a continuum.
Wow. So like a microcosm of everything. Like that's
Yeah,
how the universe is, right? Some things are less, I don't want to say less valuable, but they're like dirt. Some things are planets, some things are stars, and they each have different. They each are built out of smaller elements that have their own evolution, and they came together as a result of many many different lives.
yeah. I mean, what I think is that the same laws. This is a very speculative statement, but this is my intuition, is that the same laws apply at all scales. The picture we have today is like there's the laws of physics that we have a very good mastery of, but they only apply at the lowest level. The laws of physics, don't tell you that much about chemistry, even less about biology, and nothing at all about psychology, sociology, etc., etc. I think this is an immature state of our knowledge that
Hmm.
is there because we do not understand, the psychology and the biology and the sociology very well. I think once we understand them, we will actually see that the same laws are actually operating at all these scales, from the atom to the universe. And at different scales, you will see different phenomena, but they are a result of the same laws. And of course, in some sense, discovering what those laws are is the highest mission that science could have.
Do you consider those laws to be the truth?
No, I don't. Well, this is science, so you never really know if you found the truth,
Right.
right? But again, think of the origin of species, right? Like, what are these laws that I'm talking about? Like, we don't know them yet, but I think the one, maybe the most important book of all time at the end of the day is the origin of species,
Hmm.
right? Because again, these processes that we've been talking about of, evolutionary operators and cooperation and competition and so on, this I think is what is happening at all of these levels in its different manifestations. And one of the things that struck me most when I read The Origin of Species, right, as a computer scientist, not just as a curious person, is that first of all, it's a brilliant book. But second of all, and again, this is not a surprise, or at least, it's not news that like a lot of what he's talking about there is not just doesn't just happen in biology, right? It happens in language. It happens in economics. It happens in society, right? So, and he doesn't have the complete picture. So, of course, he's a lot more focused on competition than on cooperation. But again, I think a lot of what he talks about there is not just something about the biological world. It's something about technology. Technology follows a lot of the same evolutionary laws that organisms do. And if you think about it, why not? If technology really is our extended phenotype. So I think I think, if I were to look at science 100 years from now, I think this is what it will have discovered that we don't know yet. Is it the truth? Well, science makes no claims to knowing the truth. Science is just a way to pursue the truth, right? And
That's good to remember.
very good to remember. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Again, whenever I hear the phrase "science says," there's a little part of me that starts to get itchy.
Right. Yeah, I heard from a guest I had many years ago, physicist turned filmmaker, and he said in the university, all you had to focus on was string theory because that's what all the budget was going to, all the grants were given to string theory. And it was funny that Avi Loeb, I think his name is, the Harvard scientist, that he's getting attacked about talking about something that that object could have been coming from outside of our, and all he's saying is that, hey, we need to consider this a possibility, because and he used the example of on Rogan, he used the example of string theory too, and they're like, it's okay for them to come up with different dimensions, but they're not considering the possibility of something being from outer space, because they obviously have interest in, as you said, in that status quo, in that narrative.
So I very much agree with what he says in this book, which is that science is paradoxically extremely conservative.
Right.
But if you're a scientist and understand how the whole social system of science works, you understand why it's very conservative. And I think yes, he shouldn't have been attacked as he was for making the hypothesis that he did. I personally think that his hypothesis that this object is an alien artifact is not very parsimonious. Right? It's a very it's an explanation that sounds very simple, but presupposes an enormous amount.
Right.
Right? And so my guess, and it definitely should be entertained. I don't give it a very high prior probability of being the true explanation, but it's certainly one. Like the bottom line is like that object behaved in the sun's gravitational field in a way that we can't explain. That is the essence, right? And now, was it because it had a solar sail, right, which is his hypothesis? Maybe. If it had a solar sail, somebody had to build it, right? Or was it because there was some other phenomenon that happened with it that we don't know about yet? I think that's more likely, right? Certainly, we don't have an explanation for how it behaved, but there's actually, and again, this gets back to this whole evolutionary process. Our job as scientists is to not just entertain one hypothesis or two, right? Either this is an asteroid or this is an alien spaceship, but every hypothesis we can think of. This is actually the hardest part of science, is to not just fall into the same few hypotheses that come up easily. Like, entertain every conceivable hypothesis, within the limits of what's possible. And the point of that is not that they'll be right? All except one will be wrong. The point is that by broadening the search, you increase your chances of finding the right one, which is what matters at the end of the day. In the long run, no one will care about the wrong hypothesis, right? But unfortunately, the way science works is exactly the opposite, is that there's this herd behavior where, because the field is very uncertain, right? Science, when it comes to the public, is this very settled, or looks like this very settled thing. But the problem for you when you're at the research frontier is that it's terrifying. You don't know anything. You're confused. You're in the dark. Right? And what do you do when that happens? You grab onto other people. Mm-hmm. Right? And so what happens is that where there's a field, I think this is true. It is true in every field I know, and it's probably true in every field, is that there's the whole space of things that the field should be exploring, and then there's the tiny, tiny, tiny fraction that is actually being explored. Because somebody went in that direction, and then a bunch of people followed, and then this whole thing grew up around it. And then before long, people live inside the system where they don't realize that they're in a grain of sand and there's a whole universe outside.
Yeah, what Stephen Hawking said, that the biggest enemy of knowledge is not lack of it, it's the illusion of it.
Absolutely, yeah, completely, yeah.
We're living in these virtual realities that we have created. Scott Adams also explained it interestingly, that two movies on one screen. He was explaining the Trump phenomena, that people just see whatever they want, and that exactly follows this unscientific kind of perspective that we have sociopolitically, that we've already made a decision about the outcome, so we just find any kind of evidence that will support that outcome that we already made a decision of. And it seems to be the biggest differentiation point between science and religion, that science is like, I don't know, I just look for whatever, all the possibilities to get to a practical answer that is repeatable. But religion is like, hey, there's a heaven, and we got to get to heaven, and it doesn't matter how, and everything is justified. And that needs to be avoided at all costs.
The movie analogy is actually a really good one, because if you have a goal, then you will see the movie that's compatible with the goal.
Right.
And the thing that is paradoxical about the information society is that you would think, right? And in fact, 20 years ago, people are like, oh, now we're going to have better, more, higher quality information available to everybody, right? This is all going to be better, right? What actually happens is that the information just means instead of 2 movies on that screen, there's a million movies. It looks like white noise, right? But there's nothing better than noise to pick out patterns in. So everybody can now see, whatever movie they want, right?
Right.
The famous saying, I think, Patrick Moynihan, who said that gets cited by everybody on all sides all the time, that, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not your own facts,
Right.
right? Well, the quote unquote beauty of the information society is that you are now entitled to your own facts. You can just go find them on the internet and construct your own view around that and have a group of people that reinforce that. Of course, the scientific thing to do is you have to attend to all the evidence, not just some. But there's more, right? As long as you can cherry pick, you can, and this is what people do today, right? Is they cherry pick, right? And in some ways they can't help it because, you don't have enough brain for all that information.
Right.
Which gets back to this point that, like, we've created this massive information, which is good, but we don't have the intelligence to process it yet. So we need AI because our human brains cannot parse all of that information, and they will cherry pick, and you will just have these people in different tribes that, are effectively living on different planets. So, AI is not kind of like a nice thing to have. It's a must have.
Yeah.
The information society that we have will not work without AI. And we need better AI than we have today. People are always worrying about, like, computers will get too smart and they'll take over the world, and et cetera, et cetera. That is not the problem that we have. The problem is that they're too stupid and they've already taken over the world.
That's a very good point. That blew my mind. This alignment problem we have with artificial intelligence, do you think that there is a possibility for an ex machina kind of scenario that AI behave in the way that we think that, oh, we're all aligned? And I'm talking about more advanced kind of AGI. That we think, oh, we're aligned with the AI, but when it gets to the point, it will just drop us and basically follow whatever kind of a path that it already determined. It just fooled us basically into believing that it's aligned with us, but it just uses us to feed more and more off of our data or whatever it is that it needs.
I think the alignment problem is key. I think that's not the real alignment problem. And here's what I think the real one is and why. So the alignment problem is really in the sense that we want our machines to do our bidding. That's what we created them for. And with simple machines, that's trivial, right? The car only goes where I drive it. But once you get into AI, and we're already seeing this today with the AIs that we have today, right? We have all this power, right? And what goals is that power serving, right? And what could go wrong, right? The ex machina scenario is that it actually has different goals from ours, right? This is actually very unlikely, even if the AI is smarter than we are, right? And for a very simple evolutionary reason, which is, and also a computational one, which is, here's an example, right? You don't lie awake at night thinking that your dog is going to kill you, but your dog is a wolf. Right? Your dog is a wolf. You don't understand how a wolf works, right? The people who domesticated wolves had no idea how wolves work, and we still don't, right? We know a lot more, right? But we evolved the wolves to be friendly to us because the ones that weren't friendly, we killed. And the ones that were friendly and worked with us, got to, eat with us and take our scraps and so on. So now I can confidently sleep next to my dog, not worrying that it's going to, jump on me. Same thing with even more reason, right? We can have robots and AIs that are very smart, but every day, every step of the way, we've been evolving them to do what we want, right? And now, two things can happen, right? And these are really the two versions of the animal. One is they were secretly evolving their own evil agenda. Right? How would that happen? Right? This seems to me very unlikely.
Well, it would be evil for us. It's not going to be evil for them. For example, this is the example that Elon Musk is using as an exaggeration, just to make a point, that you ask an AI to get rid of spams and you'll end up killing all humans because humans are cause of the spam. It's
No,
not evil.
exactly.
It's not evil for AI.
No, precisely. So that is the real alignment problem,
Right.
right? So let me clarify here. What are the two versions of the alignment problem? One is that the AI has its own goals. It's thinking its own expansion and survival at our expense, right?
Which is
It
not
wants
possible,
to,
you're saying.
it's possible.
Right.
It's just very unlikely.
Unlikely.
And and some people will make such AIs because humans are crazy enough to try anything, right?
Right.
But there's also criminals and police, and overall, the world has not been taken over by criminals, right?
Yeah.
You need AI to fight AI, but I think on balance, that is not very likely, right? It's like it's not impossible that my car will jump into the air by the laws of thermodynamics, but it's like again, that's not what I worry about, right? I
Right.
worry about not crashing it, which gets us back to the real alignment problem.
Right.
The real alignment problem, and that alignment, and the Skynet scenario is something to worry about one day, right? Probably not very close. The real alignment problem is here now. It's precisely what what you're talking about is the AI thinks it's doing what I want, but it isn't because the communication between us was bad. I just said to the AI, drive me to the airport as fast as you can.
Right.
And the AI is stupid, so it runs 10 people over on the way to the airport. So the whole problem with alignment is that the bandwidth of communication between humans and machines has to be higher than it is today. The machines should spend like half of their time figuring out what we want, because what we want is actually very complex and very subtle. And again, if you go back to the example of the engagement, of maximizing engagement, right? This is the problem, right? It's actually an instance, a very important instance today of this problem is that the engineer, told the machine, go maximize engagement. And it is maximizing engagement with an unimaginable amount of data and computing power, right? And I don't even understand exactly what it's doing. But the problem is that it's maximizing engagement at the expense of all the other things that I do care about, but forgot to tell it.
Right. Forgot to tell it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. What an interesting way to put it. Forgot to tell it. This
Yeah.
is how we're destroying our world and civilization. We forgot to tell our machines what really matters to us. But is there any kind of a collective consensus on that what really matters to us?
No, there isn't, which is again why the job, I strongly believe, and again in opposition to a lot of this AI ethics crowd, that our job as the computer scientists is not to embed our values into our programs. It's to make it easy for the users to embed
Right.
their values.
Yes.
That's the whole power, is that everybody can do a different thing, and then societies will coalesce on some things, and different societies will coalesce on different things, and there'll be cooperation and competition, and the best things win out in the end. When the computer scientists say, I am going to decide that this algorithm has to have this outcome because it's what I think is good, this is the utmost arrogance.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah,
Well,
those are
who authorizes me to do that? Nobody.
yeah, I mean those are exactly the kind of people who should not be in charge.
Precisely, exactly. But those are the kind of people who will try very hard to be in charge and succeed unless you stop them. In fact, this is true in AI and it's true in academia at large, is that the reason these, wokes or whatever you want to call them have been able to take over is that the great majority of the faculty, they just want to get on with their research in whatever their field is, and they don't want to deal with all of this, right? The world is ruled by those who show up, right? I forget who said this, right?
Mhm.
And most people aren't showing up, right? Unfortunately, it's usually the fanatics, the ones who show up, right?
So would you
But
say in academia and in the tech world, the woke is absolute minority, or I don't think they're majority?
I don't know, and it's hard to find out for a number of reasons. But I'll give you a good example, right? A very empirical example, right? So I got involved in this whole debate when I started pushing back against the NERP's requirement for broader impact sections in papers and ethical reviews, that will forbid things like unfair algorithms and whatnot. And then, we were debating this for a few days on Twitter. And then somebody said, well, Pedro says that the silent majority is on his side. Exactly what you're saying here. Why don't we do a poll? So he set up a Twitter poll, right, with, 4 alternatives. And in the beginning, we were winning. And that's when the cancel crowd jumped in.
Right.
They weren't worried while we were having an academic discussion. Once there was a poll that would show And again, I don't know if it's a majority. It might be a minority, but like the point is that like what they're trying to impose is the notion that like only a few lunatics or evil people disagree with us, right? And wherever that poll wound up, it would show that there's at least a sizable minority of people, on this side. And again, there was a poll in Europe about the name change, and to change it from NIPS to the more political correct NIPS. The NIPS Foundation actually carried out this poll of the membership, right? And the non-politically correct version won. So there have been some polls of these things that actually show, I don't know if, again, it may depend on the issue and how you ask the question, but if cited the majority or a large fraction. So what I would say is like, there's the larger bunch of people is people who are either unaware. A lot of people just don't know what's going on. One of the things that I find amazing is all the people saying like, there's no cancel culture.
Right.
After all the people who've had their lives destroyed, right? Like, or like, oh, this is just a few entitled professors worrying about their privileges. What about the journalists and the high school students who've been canceled, right? But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who don't know what's going on. Again, it goes back to like the two movies, right? A lot of people are only seeing one movie, right? If you can deny that there were riots this summer, why can't you deny that there's cancel culture, right? So there's a lot of people who are oblivious, right? Yeah. And then there's a lot of people, and I don't know which of these two groups is larger, and it varies, who they are not oblivious, but they're afraid to speak up. Mm-hmm. If all that we do is raise awareness among the people who are oblivious so that they no longer are, and lower the bar for how much courage it needs to speak up, then we're winning. I think the true fanatics are actually very few.
Yep. On both sides.
On both sides. There's no doubt that the true fanatics are very few. But the whole problem, is that they have a disproportionate amount of power. Yep. Part of why they have that power is what I was just saying. They show up. They systematically take control of these organizations, including scientific ones, and then they say, science says.
Yep. Science is settled.
Yeah, because they took control. They took the trouble to take control, right? Again, that's what they do for a living. Like some of us do research for a living, others, do this, right? And then they are able to manipulate the other people around them. Some of them, they convince them with kind of like these superficial arguments, right? There was this, very famous category of people in the Soviet Union, right, which is now forgotten, which was the useful idiot. There are a lot of, it pains me to say this, but there are a lot of useful idiots in America today.
And Canada.
They're people who are, in America and in many other countries, right? Yeah. In Britain, in Australia, et cetera, like more in the English-speaking world. Yes. But what is a useful idiot? Is someone who like does the bidding of the radicals without realizing that they're being duped. Yep. And like, I could pick out random, professors from academia, and like, every other one of them would be a useful idiot, unfortunately. But the good news is like, useful idiots are not, they're not typically not stupid, at least not in academia. They're not, it's not that people are intrinsically stupid or something like that. They just haven't been paying attention, right? The thing in academia is that you have a lot of people who are extremely smart, but first of all, quick parenthesis, they tend to forget that they're not the only smart people in the world, right? One of the things that feeds this is like this perception that like, we know the masses are stupid and we know what's good for them. This drives me nuts, right?
Our betters, basically.
Yeah, the masses are more intelligent than you can imagine, right? It's like, I may be smarter than some random person on the street, right? But there's like, but that's not the question. The question is like, how much of the total intelligence of humanity is my intelligence? Right. Even if I'm 10 times smarter than the other guy on the street, I'm still only 1/700 millionth of the intelligence. But it's like, it doesn't bear comparison, right? That's why markets work better than centralized governments and so on. So that's one parenthesis. But the other side of this is that the problem in academia is that you have these very smart people that have invested their intelligence in a very narrow field. And that's all they know about. And it's necessary, right? You could say it's a necessary evil, right? But that's how they get to be good at it. And in the process, they are actually extremely ignorant about a lot of other things. Mm-hmm. But they have the arrogance of knowing that they're smart. and then like people from other fields, right, come and say something to them, and then they I mean, and I've had this experience like over and over again talking with colleagues of mine. There are very smart people, right, talking about these issues like these sociological issues like should there be preferences, should we do affirmative action in hiring and so on and so forth. And immediately I noticed that like they do not know the first thing about what is being debated. And the ones who took the time to persuade them, prevail. Another great example of this is climate science, right? Climate science, it's physical science, right? The science is settled. It's not even remotely settled. But I've lost count of the number of fellow scientists who are not climate scientists, right? Who think they know climate science, but in fact, all they know is what they've read in the media.
Yeah, the politicized narrative about that
Yeah.
topic. Yeah.
And but then they expound it on the back of their scientific expertise. It's like, I'm a scientist, I know that XYZ. Well, actually, no, you don't. Right? Go read the papers in Nature, Science, blah 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 blah, because they never did. Right? I mean, again, I'm of a skeptical bent. When this whole climate thing started happening, I read things and I was very alarmed, and then I said, let me go read some of those IPCC reports. First, I read the executive summaries and then section of the reports, and then actually went and started reading, the actual papers. And every level of this that you go creates a much different picture from the one that the activists created for you. But most scientists, again, they've never even read the executive summary of the IPCC reports. They just have this story that was told to them as it was told to everybody else. Whereas everybody else might have some modesty, like, well, I'm not a scientist, I don't know. Right? You have someone who say a computer scientist, but says like, oh, this is the science of climate science, right? But they don't know anything about it. But then they bring their, self-image as a superior intelligence to this debate. Even though paradoxically, they actually know much less about this particular issue than a lot of people who are just engineers or whoever, right? Who actually took the time to look into it.
It's such a perfect kind of a facade too, the climate science and climate change, because I was reading about it 2 days ago, how they're targeting Bitcoin now, right after Tesla invested more than $1 billion in Bitcoin, and it's an alternative monetary financial system basically, and now they're targeting it. It creates a lot of heat and energy waste, more than Argentina. So the game is so obvious, but I think one of the good news actually is that they're overplaying their hand in such a rate that more and more people are realizing it, because as you just said earlier, it's affecting their kids and their future and their education. France, for example, came out and said this wokeism, out of control leftism in the US is a problem for us because it targets our nationality and identity and all of that. So maybe that's a good news, that we kind of feel like they've gone completely out of their minds, but they really show who they are to more and more people.
No, actually, historically, you see this happening, right? McCarthyism ended when McCarthy overplayed his hand by attacking the army, right? And people are like, well, at long last, have you no decency, right? So a lot of these witch hunts and so on, a lot of these movements, they do fail when they overplay their hand, because again, the people inside the movement don't see just how they're diverging from reality, right? And I think some of that will happen here, right? And perversely in that regards, the sooner they overplay their hand, the better. So let them go hog wild, provoke them to be even more extreme, such that this will illustrate to people just how off base they are. Unfortunately, the downside, and maybe that's what will happen, right? I think that will probably be part of it. It's already happening in some realms. The downside of that is that it's a very high cost way of bringing this to an end,
right?
Because while they're overplaying their hand, they're actually hurting real people. Yep. So I'd rather stop this before that level of damage happens. I think at this point, some level of that damage is unavoidable and is already happening.
Right. Sorry, my dogs. Let me read one other quote from your book, and I have maybe 2 or 3 more questions. Thank you so much for your time. This has been an honor. Your quote is, "You could even say that the God of Genesis himself is a programmer. Language, not manipulation, is his tool of creation. Words become worlds." Beautiful. And should I assume that you believe in the simulation hypothesis?
I mean, just to give you the context for that quote, right? I'm talking about being a programmer,
Yeah.
right? And how being a programmer is at heart a creative activity.
Right.
The thing that's beautiful about computer science is this is more than anything else why I went into computer science is there's so much range to create. Right? You can create a movie, a piece of music, you can create a book. But with programs, with computers, you can create a world. Not just, a world that you describe on the page, but actually a real moving world that people can interact with. And you can create a very, very rich world. Now, the downside of that is that, as every programmer knows, is that it's hard, right? There's bugs, there's you will spend a lot of your time just, shoveling crap and whatnot. But at the end of the day, a programmer is a miniature god, right? And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, don't go into computer science because they get exposed to like computer science 101, which is, learning how to program in Java, which is all the unpleasant stuff and none of the interesting. It's like, it's like if you designed a course to make computer science unappealing to people, it would be what most, programming 101 courses are, right? So in a way, part of what I'm trying to explain in that chapter, right, is like the larger context of computer science around AI, and why and why there's so much power, right? I literally the whole reason why computer science is powerful is that once I have taken that trouble of creating that world, small or large, it will then work by itself, right? That's why you can have, WhatsApp, a company created by, a dozen people in a couple of years, being sold to Facebook for what, $12 billion, right? How can that small number of people make that big of a difference? It's because of this, right? And so I'm making an analogy. And then interestingly, right, the God of Genesis, right, the whole story of Genesis starts with the word, right?
Yeah.
In the beginning was the word. So the idea is that we tend to think of language as something that originates in the world after, many things that went before, right? But you can also look at it the other way where, there are a lot of words that start with language because they're defined in language, right? Now, of course, the simulation hypothesis that, yeah, we are all in a simulation, right? And I was very fascinated by that hypothesis for about 6 months when I was maybe 20, right? And then, because it is kind of really fascinating, right? But then after a while, you realize the following is, well, I don't know if this hypothesis is true or false, but either way, I have to test it or I don't, right? And I almost by definition, I can't think of a way to test that hypothesis, right? If there's a way to test it, by God, we should be all over it. But if there isn't a way to test it, then, it's pointless to worry about it. Maybe we're on a computer and tomorrow someone will pull the plug, but, I have no way of knowing. So in a way, the simulation hypothesis is a metaphysical hypothesis because it's not something we can actually think much. I mean, it's a great motif for like scientific, speculation and science fiction and whatnot. But, my point of view about a lot of these questions is about, things like, does God exist and whatnot, is like, we do not have the ability, language gives us the ability to ask more questions than we can answer. And this is one of them.
Mm-hmm. I find it really helpful to think of maybe smaller simulation models that the society that we are experiencing, it doesn't necessarily have to be a digital simulation, just the reality that has been created for many centuries, I would say, by people, power holders, that, people were reading news from very specific kind of sources, the media was kind of projecting a specific kind of a message. So a Truman Show-like kind of a life that most people are experiencing itself can be looked at some kind of a simulation, right?
I agree with that. So part of what every society does, every culture, is construct a reality. People in different societies truly live in different realities. People in the Middle Ages just lived in a different reality from the world was the same, but their reality was completely different.
Based
right?
on their need and objectives and experience.
No, and like, they believe that, I think even at least, in the West, even people who are very strong believers in the Christian God do not believe in him the same way that people did in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, like God was with you every second of the day. Or like some cultures believe that your ancestors are watching over you. And it's like, you really are every day thinking about what your ancestors are doing, looking at you, right? And you could debate to what extent that is metaphorical or not, to what extent people really do believe in these gods the same way they believe in reality. But the bottom line is this is informs what they think every moment of the day, right? And I think the society that we have today is actually no exception, right? In fact, there was a philosopher, I forget who, that said something that I thought was incredibly insightful, which was that science is the mode of perception of industrial society.
Mm-hmm.
It is also a mode of perception.
Mm-hmm.
It is one that is particularly good at being in tune with reality, and that's what makes it powerful. But it's still a mode of perception. And again, science 100 years from now could look very different from science now. And in fact, science now is already, the scientific mode of perception today is very different from the scientific mode of perception 200 years ago. So this is part of what societies do, is they construct this reality. In fact, your brain constructs a reality, right? Vision researchers say that vision is controlled hallucination. And this is exactly right? Like, you don't actually see things.
Mm-hmm.
You see what your brain has conjured up in response to the stimuli. But every object that you see in the world is actually a creation of your brain.
Right.
That hopefully lines up with something that's in the world, but your only interface is those photons.
So there is an objective reality. We are having a subjective experience of it. And meanwhile, there are people who are trying to define and arbit those subjective experiences in an objective kind of a way.
Yeah. So
throughout human history.
Yeah, and to answer this question squarely, is there an objective reality? I believe that there is. I also believe that just as the simulation, there is no final test that you can use to say, oh, this is the objective reality, right? Precisely because we do not have direct access to it, right? But now, here's the crucial question, right, which gets to the whole, social problem around this, is, are we better off assuming that there's an objective reality and we should try to find out what it is and converge on it, try to agree, right? If the point of there being an objective reality is that you and I should be able to agree on it, right?
Otherwise, and have access to it, regardless of our state.
Yeah, and if we disagree, there should be a test that shows, oh, you're right, I'm wrong, so now I will change my beliefs, right? Once you do, like, these postmodernists and critical theorists and whatnot, and say like, oh, no, there's no objective reality. There's just, everybody has their own, you have your own knowledge, right? The problem with this is that it destroys the fabric of society. It means we are no longer trying to converge on something, right? There's no longer, it's like, there's this hyping of like the lived experience. Right? The lived experience is more important than science. I mean, I understand we all have a lived experience, but the problem with that is that if that's the criterion, then we can't talk anymore. My lived experience cannot be refuted by you. If I say you were discriminating against me, it's my lived experience. You're not allowed to disagree.
Right.
If we agree that there's an objective reality, we go like, okay, so what's the evidence that you're being discriminated against? Right? And again, I've had the experience, over the years of talking with a lot of people about this, and the problem is that a lot of these beliefs are not amenable to evidence.
Right.
It's like there's no, again, at which point they're kind of like a religious belief, right? But if you believe that everybody has their reality, then that's fine. But you can. But my point is, like, there's the scientific question of, is there one or not? And I think there is, but I can't prove it. But there's also and maybe less important to scientists, but more important to society at the end of the utilitarian question, which is, are we better off believing that there's an objective reality or not? And I definitely say we are better off in believing that there's an objective reality.
I think better or worse will be determined based on the context and our objective, the goal that we are trying to reach. But I think that's beside the point of what these people, postmodernists or whoever which to me, they're just totalitarians. That's what they are.
I mean, they are, because then they use this as an excuse to impose their view. But you said very well that it depends on the goal. But let's just say that, we can all agree that, life is better than death and health is better than sickness, and et cetera, et cetera. If you're in tune with objective reality, you can have medicine and you can save people's lives. And you can build cars and planes and, CRT scans and you name it. So being in tune with objective reality makes a big difference to your well-being at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right? Again, what the reason we are where we are today versus the Middle Ages, right, is that we believe in this, and that's what has created all the scientific and technological progress that these postmodernists now take for granted, without which they wouldn't even exist, right?
Yeah, and their depth of hypocrisy is that they're saying there is no objective experience, but then they want to make that subjective opinion into an objective experience.
Yeah, again, there were generations of postmodernists. The early generation was, anything goes, right? The Derridas and the
Yeah,
Foucaults and whatnot. But the current generation, of course, has perverted that
right.
postmodernism into like, no, my truth is the
Yeah,
truth.
yeah. Which, the question is, if my truth is that you're full of shit, I mean, what are we gonna do then? Like, how are we gonna settle it? Which is a very dangerous route, because this kind of my truth, your truth, how are we gonna settle it? It always leads to violence.
Exactly. And again, this is what the postmodernists said. And then again, I mean, like, if you start from the present premise that there's no objective reality, then what determines what is the perceived reality? Power, right?
Yep.
It's who has the most power. And in fact, people have been saying this for a while, right? And of course, power influences your perception of reality. But in a way, what you see today is like that taken to its logical extreme, right?
Yep.
And so these people, they want to take power because they want to impose their reality on the rest of us, regardless of whether, it has anything to do with objective reality or not.
Do you also think this option, because I see it as a war of meaning, because we experience certain things, but the war is over how they define what we're experiencing. Do you see this wokeism, this totalitarian approach to postmodernism, however you want to define it, as a inevitable and natural end of a fully secular, liberal, democratic system?
It's not, that's actually a great question. I think it's not an inevitable end, but unfortunately, so there was the Enlightenment, right? That created this mindset where, there's a marketplace of ideas, et cetera, right? And this is one of the best things that have happened to humanity. Again, it's why we have the life that we have today. Unfortunately, it opens itself up. The marketplace of ideas is open to bad ideas by definition, right? Because you don't know if they're good or bad going in, right? And then some bad ideas can acquire power, right? And and this started with the French Revolution, but maybe the paradigmatic example is Marxism, right? The thing about Marx is that he wasn't just a philosopher, right? He said, we are going to have this praxis that is going to, first of all, he had these prophecies that were wrong, but like, this was like, we're going to impose these ideas on the people. And then, Lenin developed that further. And wokeism is really just the latest incarnation of this problem. It's not the first one, and it will not be the last one. Who knows what the next one will look like, but this problem will always be with us. It's like, a liberal society is actually an amazingly functioning organism, but it needs an immune system against these, diseases. And every now and then, the immune system is not functioning very well in certain contexts, like the university that we've talked about, and then you get this sepsis, where the germs multiply very fast before the immune system can catch up with them. And if you don't do something about it, it does kill the organism, right? So it may well be that at the end of the day, we will come crashing down because, these people make it come crashing down because they debase education so much that, math is racist and, 2 + 2 = 5 and you can't, and your bridges, don't stand up anymore and so on, right? I hope it won't come to that, but I could see it coming to that.
Yeah.
So this is a problem that will recur, right? And in different forms, right? Like the Cultural Revolution was similar to the October Revolution in some ways, but quite different in some others. And, wokeism is different from these in some ways. One of the most important ones is that we have a technology now that we didn't then. But if you look at the totalitarian regimes of the mid-20th century, they were master users of the mass media of the time. Mm. Stalin and Hitler were the first ones to really make use of radio and film and whatnot for propaganda purposes. And then, Churchill and Roosevelt caught up and learned how to use those, right? But they were behind in the beginning, right? And in the most famous example is the printing press, right? It was without no printing press, there would probably not have been, a Reformation and so on, right? So in every turn of this wheel, the technology that's available, right, becomes one of the key defining elements of what happens. And again, what you have to do is you have to master that technology so that you don't wind up under the foot of the ones who didn't while you were idle.
Yeah, technology is the key. I had this conversation with someone else, Jason Rizzo Giorgiani. I don't know if you know him, philosopher. And we were basically talking about how a tech-based and technology-driven narrative has been lacking on the right side of politics for a very, very long time, and they lost many different aspects of this war, whatever you want to call it, exactly because of it.
Yeah, and why did that happen? I think the biggest reason is that the universities are, left-wing zones.
Right.
Right. All the people seeing this firsthand and taking advantage of it and then building on it. The unfortunately conservatives do not have enough access to the universities, which again is terrible because some of their ideas will be right, some of them will be wrong, but you need those people looking at technology, right? And like the thing about this whole area of AI ethics and whatnot is that like everybody is left wing.
Yeah.
Right. It's like again, like people have like journalists and what have asked me, this and like, so what do conservatives think about AI ethics? And I actually have a hard time answering this question because I don't know.
They probably don't even know it exists.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so, I wrote this piece in The Spectator, right? That his entire goal was you gotta, alert conservatives to the fact that there is this now happening and they need to get into this with their ideas and we need to have a real debate before the science is settled. But yeah, that's the problem is that the universities have shut out the conservatives, which of course, creates an imbalance of power. Because now the people on the left wing can use these things and the people on the right wing don't.
Very true. Very true. Pedro's book is called The Master Algorithm, How the Quest for the Ultimate Learning Machine Will Remake Our World. It was one of the only 2 AI books on the bookshelf of Xi Jinping, president for life in China. We almost talked for 2 hours. Thank you so much for this. I enjoyed it tremendously. Let me ask you the last question I ask all my guests. Actually, let me ask you one question before that. What is next for you and where can our audience follow your work?
What's next for me is more machine learning research. I think we are at a very exciting time in AI where the really important things are have not happened yet, but they're going to happen in the next 10, 20 years. So this is, I started out in AI, 20 or 30 years ago, but this is the time. Everything was just leading up to this. So that's one of the things I want to do. The other thing I want to do is, write books and essays. I think, again, there's a lot to be done in that format and for a broader audience than just the AI specialists. So I think The Master Algorithm was my first book, but hopefully it will by no means be my last. To follow me, the easiest thing to do is follow me on Twitter. Because what I do in these various areas, I usually post there, and of course, I will publish things in various places, both research and for a general audience. So that's the other side.
Excellent. The advancement that you're seeing in AI and machine learning. Let me ask you this way: how do you feel about Ray Kurzweil's date with respect to the singularity 2045 that he's talking about?
I think first of all, it's very hard to predict. The most important thing about scientific progress is that it's unpredictable. And it happens in jumps. You can have long periods of low progress followed by periods of very rapid progress. And I don't know when so we're on this wave right now, and it will plateau at some point. It hasn't plateaued yet, but it will inevitably plateau. Where the plateau will happen, you can't predict because it depends. This is not like some law of physics. It depends on what, we, the researchers, come up with. And I don't know how many jumps are needed to get to, human level AI and what the barriers are in between. So it's very hard to predict. Now, so anybody who gives you a date for when we'll have strong artificial intelligence is speculating, right? And I think Ray is speculating, with some basis to it. But I think the first order of it is the error bars are enormous. At one extreme, maybe it will never happen because the problem is just too hard. Right? I'm a scientist. I believe in reductionism. I think there is an algorithm. Again, part of the empirical evidence for the master algorithm is that your brain does it, and I should be able to write down the program that your brain is running. I just don't know what it is yet. It could be complex or not, right? But it might be too complex, and in which case we will never get to it. I don't think that's the case, but it's a possibility. At the other end, and more excitingly, maybe, some kid in a garage is inventing the master algorithm right now. In fact, part of my motivation for writing the book, and I say it, is, again, following on some of the things that we've been talking about, we in the field have focused on too narrowly on a few paradigms. And my feeling is that even after we've unified them, and we're making very good progress towards that, some of the really important ideas will still be missing. And I actually think someone outside the field is more likely to come up with them than someone who's already thinking along these tracks. So a non-expert. But at the same time, they need to know enough. So maybe reading a book like The Master Algorithm will help. So it could go all the way from it's already happening to it will never happen. Even if it's already happening, right? If someone had that amazing algorithm today, it would still take decades for it to play itself out, right? So where do I think we'll be in 2047? I think we will be much farther along than we are today. Exactly where we are is very hard to predict. Are you getting this?
I can wait for it.
Yeah. This unfortunately is not my cell phone, so yeah. So sorry.
That's okay.
So yeah. Sorry, I lost my train of.
The big changes that is going to happen.
Right. So where are we going to be in 2047? I don't think anybody knows for sure. But I think what we want to do is be prepared for the range of places where we could be, right? From the most pessimist, part of, machine learning is all about prediction. And actually half the science of prediction is knowing what you can't predict, but being prepared for all the possible outcomes. Mm. And I think this is what we want to, when we think about AI in 2030, 2040, etc., right? We want to think about the range of places where it could be, and we want to be prepared for all those possibilities. Not assume that there's going to be one scenario and go for that one.
Excellent. Let me ask you the final question I ask all my guests, that if you come across an intelligent alien from a different civilization, what would you say is the worst thing humanity has done? And what would you say is our greatest achievement?
I would say our greatest achievement is the extent to which we know nature and the universe, including ourselves, right? If you think of the universe as being made of, atoms and, photons, we are completely insignificant, right? We are specks of dust on a speck of dust. But if you think of the universe as being made of information, and increasingly people across science see the universe as being made of information, human beings are amazing. There is no bigger concentration of information than the one in your brain. And the concentration, and evolution has been concentrating information in your brain for, millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. And once you start reading books, right? Once you start communicating with people, there's more information with your brain. Once you start studying nature and writing books about it, there's more information. Now, we as a society, right, as a repository of information about the universe, right? If you put a diagram like of the universe, how much information there is, right? Earth would be this Dirac delta function. It's like this sharp, super high peak, right? Compare the amount of information that exists on Earth, thanks to life, but in particular, thanks to humanity, with the amount of information that exists on Mars or Venus. There's just no comparison, right? None. So that's our biggest achievement, right? What is the worst thing that we have done? Well, of course, is that in the process of climbing this ladder, we have done so much death and destruction, right? That is often exaggerated. People have a much more pessimistic, if you read Steven Pinker's books, for example, he'll show you why, on balance, fewer people die violently today, much fewer than before. Nevertheless, right? Things like, World War I and World War II, and, nuclear weapons are still here, right? So far, we've avoided the worst, but again, you can't take any of that for granted. So that, I think, is the biggest downside.
Excellent. Well,
the alien would probably have the same thing to say to us, is my guess. They would be proud of the same about themselves.
Them. Oh, okay. Yeah. Interesting.
About their achievements and their the things that they are not proud of.
Yeah, an interesting variation I heard about the alien itself was that the alien could be coming from a civilization that is hive mind. So the priorities would be different than what we were experiencing individually.
I actually think hive minds are not as adaptive as what we have.
Oh, really?
Our society is a mess because it's a bunch of independent agents, and we have, and the cost of, dealing with the conflicting interests is very, very high. So, our society is far from optimal. We can make it better, I think, with technology and with being more mature. But a hive mind, right, is actually also, it goes too far, right? In machine learning, there's this bias variance trade-off, right? I think in human society, we have a lot of variance, right? A hive mind does not have enough variance, right? A society like ours is more able to generate new ideas and then let the better ideas grow than a hive mind is, right? A hive mind is actually not the most adaptive. So I think at the end of the day, humans beat the Borg, right? A human society, for all its imperfections, right, and for all the mess that human life is, at the end of the day, this is a much more adaptive way to organize a species than the Borg ever could be.